April the 25th, 1915, men of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed at Gallipoli. It was on that day the traditions of our fighting forces were born. These stories of their sons and daughters at war we proudly dedicate to the memory of Zach. This is the story of a march through a valley of death to a Razorback Ridge and a whole division's attack on a dizzy one-man front. A campaign in which no man who took part can ever forget. A campaign which added immortal luster to the battle honors of the AIF's 7th Division. This is the story of a valley, known for 1,000 years to the natives of New Guinea as Ramu, Valley of Death, and of Shaggy Ridge. With the Australians' capture of Lae and Salamoa, Madang became the remaining forward Japanese base in New Guinea. Lae had been captured so swiftly that it had been impossible to prevent the escape of some 5,000 of its Japanese garrison. Now they were falling back on Bogajim in their retreat to Madang, some along the mountainous coast of the Huon Peninsula, others along the valley of the Markham and Ramu rivers. The 7th Division's advance into the Markham and Ramu valleys began at Nadzab. From there were many rivers to cross. So first at Kayapit an airstrip was seized, then another was built at Dampu for the flying in of supplies. The culmination of the campaign was the Australian assault on Shaggy Ridge, the fantastic razor-backed mountain from which the Japanese commanded the Ramu Valley. Elements of the 7th Division were still being flown from Port Moresby into Nadzab when the division's advance troops, the 25th Brigade, entered Lae on September the 16th, 1943. The brigade to undertake the next major phase of the campaign was the renowned 21st, the heroes of the Kokoda Trail. As they flew into battle again, they could see below them the tangled mass of the Owen Stanley Ranges, where they had repulsed the first savage enemy thrust towards Port Moresby. That country held bitter memories of adversity. But now the Allies commanded the air. Australia could seek out the invader and carry the war to him to bring peace to New Guinea again. Lae was ours, but there was still work for the 21st Brigade to do. After the Kokoda Trail and the death swamps of Goda, what lies ahead? Already Nadzab had become an important Allied base, the key to future offensives. The men of the 21st Brigade disembarked, still unaware of their latest role. Then news arrived of Japanese moves further up the Markham Valley to threaten Nadzab and Lae. While the AIF build-up of manpower and supplies went on, Major General Vasey, 7th Division Commander, planned to exploit the victory at Lae. At Kayapit on September the 19th, the 2nd 6th Commando Squadron seized the airstrip and routed 700 Japanese. This tiny force dug in and barred the Japanese from the one airstrip which could be used immediately against Nadzab, but the commando's ammunition was running low. They brought up their one field gun and prepared to fight to the end. At Kayapit village, Lieutenant Jim Keeley began to recruit native labor to get the vital airstrip into working order again. The natives agreed to help. They hated the Japanese. They had the example of a Papuan company to encourage them, trained soldiers of their own race, preparing to move out to support the commandos. Next day, Brigadier Ivan Doherty, commanding the 21st Brigade, reached Kayapit. He found the villagers and Papuan soldiers making ready for the arrival of the 7th Division. there was much to be done. Tough kunai grass had to be cleared to widen and lengthen the airstrip to allow the heavy Dakota troop transports to land. It was back-breaking work, but the natives, with vivid memories of recent Japanese occupation, labored tirelessly. Thanks to them, Kayapit quickly became a major Allied air base in the Pacific. The 21st Brigade began flying in immediately. First to arrive were the Western Australians of the 2nd 16th Battalion, then the Victorians of the 2nd 14th. The 2nd 27th South Australians were still on the way from Port Moresby. Quickly, strength built up under Allied fighter cover. The Western Australians prepared to move up the Markham Valley towards the main Japanese force. Now the men of the Kokoda Trail knew that they had a job to do again, and knew that it was of vital importance. Japanese documents captured at Kayapit showed that the enemy was concentrating 3,500 troops in the Ramu Valley to counterattack Nadzab. For the first time since they reached New Guinea, they found the going relatively easy. Brigadier Doherty's objective was Dampu at the head of the Ramu Valley. Dampu was 60 miles away. The urgent task was to clear the Markham Valley, seize Dampu, and force the enemy back into the Finisterre Ranges before he could build up his strength. Forward, the advance guard of the brigade thrust up the valley to seize Dampu before the Japanese could launch their offensive. Fast-flowing rivers were a major obstacle to the 7th Division throughout this campaign. The rivers seemed innumerable, and the division became expert at improvising crossings in all kinds of circumstances. A rifle chain was always the best. There's strength in numbers. Messenger dogs were used for a time as an experiment by the 2nd 27th Battalion. At first, this experiment seemed to be successful. The dogs could easily get a message through in places where rivers and jungle made quick cable laying difficult. But when the troops went into action, the battle noises confused the dogs. This dog brings the message through. At headquarters, the message is removed. Good dog, good boy. And off he goes back to the forward platoon. The native carriers have their troubles too. It takes all your strength to get yourself across a stream like this, without having to get supplies across as well. It's all the more difficult if you don't want to get your new lap wet. The supply problem became more acute as Australian strength concentrated on Dampu. In this campaign, easily the best carriers were members of the Chimbu tribe. They were strong, tireless, and loyal. The Chimbus, not very far removed from their fierce head-hunting ancestors. Relentlessly, the 7th Division closed in. Supplies and reinforcements moved steadily forward. Shells for the artillery had high priority in the line. Every new river crossed meant that the grip on the enemy was tightening, but there always seemed to be one more river to cross. Better no clothes than wet clothes. In this campaign, you quickly learned the traps for beginners. Oh, well, it's lovely once you're in. The troops went first, and after them came the carriers. Sometimes rivers were a help. It was far easier to advance this way than through the jungle. Then for a short stretch the going might be drier and easier. But you could bet in this country it wouldn't be easy for long. It wasn't. Hey, what about me? Signalmen with their own skilled native boys extend the lines of communication as the advance goes on. Engineers sweated to build the bridges which would allow maximum strength to be concentrated against the enemy's defenses. The bridges were improvised from local materials. They had to be strong to withstand pounding floodwaters. Then another had to be tackled. Each posed its own problems. At least the timber was near at hand. First, the foundations were dug. With the bridge works in position, a rough log deck was added. The whole structure had to be strong enough for the vehicles which were beginning to reach the 7th Division, both by air and along newly constructed valley roads. The nearer jeeps could get to the front line, the easier life became for everyone. And for none more than the signalmen, who were now constructing an efficient network of line communications. Now the pressure on the enemy grew formidable. Artillery of the 2nd 4th Field Regiment moved forward to within range of the Japanese defenses. Western Australians of the 2nd 16th Battalion moved up across the labyrinth of rivers, fording some and moving across others on a shuttle service of inflated rubber dinghies. Behind them came the artillery, shepherded by the versatile jeeps. This tractor handled the heavy weight. The Australians had one advantage. They were in relatively clear country where they could use aggressive tactics. The Japanese knew it, and unable to use the jungle tactics with which they were familiar, they fell back quickly towards the mountain ranges above the Ramu Valley. But the foot sloggers' war was never easy, especially under the equator. The war seemed a long way off, or wasn't. The Japanese rear guards skirmished as they retreated. By October the 4th, the Australians had occupied Dampu, and immediately they constructed an airstrip. Dampu was dominated by Shaggy Ridge, rising to 5,700 feet, and called Shaggy after Captain Shaggy Clampett of South Australia, whose company first scaled it. General Vasey and Brigadier Doherty were ordered to make the protection of Dampu and its airstrip their first responsibility. The first job for the 21st Brigade, with the 25th Brigade in support, was to clear the enemy from the foothills commanding Dampu. Once again, the veterans of Kokoda found themselves engaged in bitter jungle fighting. Communications were always in danger. Signalers laying cable through almost impenetrable rainforest constantly risked ambush. And so did our fighting patrols. No further opposition from this quarter. The grenades have done their job. This was the war as the 7th Division knew it. Nerve-wracking patrol activity fought by single sections. This section is lucky. They've a tent. With the machine gun post silenced, they wait for the rest of the platoon to advance. But they can never relax, even if the weather permitted. They are always on guard, for this is the Valley of Death. A new day, another patrol. There's nothing like a cuppa or a shave for a good start. At least there's no shortage of water. But even the water is treacherous. Chlorinated tablets have to be used to purify it. A new day, another patrol. What will this day bring? Mud, that's certain. Mud and hardship in a country as antagonistic as the enemy himself. Not far ahead in the foothills below Shaggy Ridge, the Japanese have an outpost. This outpost is today's objective. Now they can see it and plan the attack. By field telephone, the word goes back to platoon headquarters. Today's advance begins. Meanwhile, in the Ramu Valley above Dampu, Major General Vasey built up the supporting services which would make the success of the final assault a certainty. Daily, long lines of native carriers kept supplies moving forward. Daily, the wounded came back. At Dampu Field Hospital, the best possible medical care was organized by the commanding officer, Ron Humphrey. His patients even got pajamas. While doctors battle against infection and disease, the cooks attend to the needs of the inner man. Scones, piping hot, just like Mother used to make. But washing up at home was never like this. The trip at Dampu was now operative. The Commander-in-Chief, General Blamey, met Major General Vasey and New Guinea Force Chief of Staff, Major General Berryman, to discuss the next stage of the campaign. It would would be a tough one. General Blamey climbed to a ridge outside Dampu to see for himself what the 7th Division faced. Shaggy Ridge. General Blamey, meeting the men of the 7th Division, found them impatient to get to grips with their enemy. No disability could keep these men back when they scented battle. Along Shaggy Ridge, reconnaissance planes reported the Japanese were strongly fortified. Shaggy Clampett's South Australians had long sought ways to outflank this heavily armed bastion. Only frontal assault would take it. Blocking progress was this pinnacle, the Pimple. The exhausted South Australians cleared their positions for fresh assault troops. Far below, the 25-pounders got ready. Up the slopes captured by the South Australians in weeks of murderous flurries of action moved the men of the 2nd 16th Battalion. Not even the Kokoda Trail posed the fearsome problems of this attack. They pressed on beyond the South Australian positions towards the start line. At a signal from a scout, they advanced. 2 days after Christmas Day, 0 hour, the barrage begins. Western Australians move up 500 yards of steep hillside towards the ridge and the approach to the Pimple. Not for a moment do the guns let up. His gain, but the Japanese still hit back from the Pimple. Australian casualties are light, thanks to our covering barrage. Flesh wounds look ugly, but mean little while the battle continues. A field dressing and a bandage can keep a brave man going, but some require expert first aid. The stretcher bearers come forward, daring enemy fire to evacuate the bad cases. Others are helped out of the firing line by their mates. Royal Australian Air Force boomerangs strap the obstinate bunkers, and Kitty Hawks dive bomb the ridge. The 7th Division attacks again, overruns the Pimple and hurls the demoralized enemy back along the ridge towards his base. For the Japanese, this is the beginning of the end. This digger will not see Shaggy Ridge again. When he recovered, the West Australians had been relieved by the troops of the 18th Brigade. Veterans of Milne Bay and Puna drove the enemy back towards the coast. The 21st Brigade have finished their part in this campaign. Some are carried out down to the hospital at Dampu. Smoke after a job well done. Some of the wounded march back. Some will never march again. Dampu War Cemetery, sacred to the memory of the men of the 21st and 25th Brigades, who threw the Japanese back into the ranges where they were helpless, and of the 18th Brigade, who routed them there. The 7th Division, who in the Ramu Valley and at Shaggy Ridge added another brilliant chapter to their immortal record in the proud tradition of Anzac.